was down to just one big blind. No one knew his name. He wasn't a pro. He wasn't a regular on the circuit. He was a 49-year-old father from Atlanta who played home games with friends. So how did he end up one hand away from winning the biggest poker tournament in the world? This is the real story of George Holmes, an average guy who outplayed the pros for millions. Before 2021, George Holmes wasn't a name you'd recognize. He didn't have bracelets. He didn't have a long list of live cashes. In fact, his only recorded tournament score was a 213th place finish in the 2019 WSOP main event. Solid showing, sure, but not exactly the stuff of legend. That one run earned him just over $50,000, and after that, he went right back to his regular life. Originally from New Jersey, George had settled in Georgia and built a steady career in the payment processing world. He started playing poker back in 1999, right around the time No Limit Hold'em started becoming a national obsession. But unlike a lot of players who got swept up in the moneymaker boom and hit the tournament circuit hard, George stayed grounded in cash games. He wasn't trying to travel or chase points. He had a job, a family, one promise to himself. If he played one tournament a year, it would be the WSOP main event. That was it. And that's what made 2021 so wild. Because this wasn't a guy with hundreds of buy-ins behind him. He wasn't testing out cutting-edge solver strategies or reviewing hand histories with a coach. George Holmes was a recreational player through and through, and somehow he found himself deep in the biggest tournament in poker. He jumped into the action on day one of the $10,000 main event, and right from the start, things were looking good. He bagged 168,500 chips, enough to put him in 86th place out of nearly 2,000 players. Nothing flashy, but solid. He was building. Day 2 saw a small dip to 151,900. That dropped him down to 680th place out of 1,440. He was still in the mix, still grinding, still there. Day 3, he made a move. By the end of the night, George had worked his stack up to 803,000 chips, 110th out of 1,000 players remaining. Not quite center stage yet, but clearly gaining momentum. And then came day 4. This is when people started noticing. He finished the day with just under 2 million in chips, sitting comfortably in 68th place. On day 5, he pushed even further. 3.2 million chips, 53rd place, only 96 players left. By day 6, it was no longer a quiet climb. It was a statement. George bagged an incredible 18.4 million chips, enough for 6th place out of 36. His name was on the leaderboard. His photos started appearing on live blogs. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Then day 7 happened. And if you only looked at the final chip counts, you'd think it was smooth sailing. Holmes ended that day with a monster stack of 83.7 million, second in chips at the final table. But that number doesn't tell the full story, because at one point that day, George Holmes was down to his last big blind. It was a brutal cooler. Holmes shoved 9 million with King-Queen and ran smack into Jack Oliver's Ace-King. No help came, and when the chips were counted, Holmes was left with just 475,000, barely enough to post the big blind and ante. In most cases, that's the end. You shake hands, thank the dealer, and walk off into the Vegas night. But Holmes didn't leave. A few hands later, he found himself all in again, this time in a 5-way pot with 4 other players calling. Somehow, some way, he won it. Now he had 2 million. Still small, still vulnerable, but it was something. He didn't stop there. Within 30 minutes, that stack doubled, then doubled again. 90 minutes after being left for dead, Holmes was up to 16 million. By the dinner break, he was at 20. Just before the final level of the day, he surged to 32 million, putting him right back in the hunt. That comeback alone would have been a great story. George wasn't done, because the very next chapter of his run featured one of the most respected players in the world, Chance Kornuth. Kornuth is a crusher, multiple bracelets, millions in winnings, the kind of guy who can sniff out weakness from a mile away. But this time, he picked the wrong spot. Kornuth opened from early position with Ace-King, a premium hand. Holmes, sitting in the small blind, looked down at pocket aces. He put in a 3-bet. Kornuth shoved over the top. Holmes snap-called, and the board ran clean. Kornuth was gone. George Holmes, the guy who barely had a chip to his name a few hours earlier, just knocked out a top-tier pro and vaulted himself into 2nd place at the final table. It was the kind of hand every poker player dreams about. Chance Kornuth, seasoned pro with a stacked resume and millions in earnings, raised to 1.2 million under the gun. George Holmes, sitting in the cutoff, peeked down at pocket aces, the dream scenario. He bumped it up to $3 million. Action folded back to Kornuth, who wasted no time. He moved all in for just under $26 million. And Holmes didn't hesitate. Snap call. Kornuth had ace-king, monster in most spots, but completely dominated here. And the flop only made things worse. Ace-6-4. Top set for Holmes. Kornuth needed a miracle. It didn't come. The turn and river changed nothing. Just like that, Chance Kornuth was gone in 16th place. Holmes, who was once down to a single big blind, now had 68 million chips in front of him. The home game hero had turned into a serious contender, one of the biggest stacks left in the tournament. When the final table kicked off, Holmes was in seat 5 with a towering 83.7 million, good for 105 big blinds in second place overall. Only one player had him covered, George Aldemir, a German pro living in Austria with a mountain of chips, 140 million to be exact. The rest of the table was no joke either. Jack Oliver from the UK, Alejandro Lococo from Argentina, Özgür Sesilmaz from Turkey, all sharp, composed, and battle-tested. But for Holmes, this was completely uncharted territory. He'd never played under this kind of spotlight, never sat on a WSOP main event final table. Still, he didn't look out of place. His deep cash game roots meant he was comfortable with big stacks and slow structure. More importantly, he looked calm, like nothing could shake him. When the final table began, Holmes stayed true to what got him there. He didn't force anything. He waited for the right spots, stayed out of trouble, and let the others slip up. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. One by one, the field thinned out, till it was just 3 players left: George Aldemir, Jack Oliver, and George Holmes. Then came the hand that changed everything. Jack Oliver was in the small blind. He shoved all in for just under 36 million chips. Holmes was in the big blind. He asked for a count, took his time, and made the call with Queen Jack of spades. Oliver had ace-8 offsuit, slight edge pre-flop. The flop came 8-7-5, safe for Oliver. But then came the jack on the turn. Top pair for Holmes. The river bricked, and just like that, Jack Oliver was out in third place, taking home $3 million. Holmes, who came into the final table as second in chips, was now guaranteed $4.3 million. The only thing standing between him and poker immortality? George Aldemir. It was set, the final 2. A classic David versus Goliath matchup. Inside the Rio Convention Center, the atmosphere shifted. This was no longer just a poker game, it was a spectacle. The rail was split, some cheering for the seasoned pro, others hoping the hometown hero could pull off the impossible. The energy was electric. Aldemir had the credentials. Born in Germany, living in Austria with over $12 million in live earnings before the tournament even started. He wasn't new to pressure. He played high rollers around the world. He knew how to win. Holmes, this was only his second ever WSOP main event. His last cash was 2 years earlier, 213th place. He'd never been on a stage like this, but none of that seemed to matter. He looked calm, focused, ready. When heads-up play began, Aldemir held the chip lead, about 262 million to Holmes' 137 million. On paper, it looked like a big gap, but both stacks were deep. They had room to play real poker, and Holmes had momentum. He'd just busted Jack Oliver. His rail was on fire. Even people who didn't know him were now rooting for him. Something about his run felt different, special. From the first few hands, Holmes made it clear he wasn't going to sit back. He came out aggressive, picking up small pots with well-timed bets. He applied pressure. When the board looked good for his range, he took control. He leaned on his cash game instincts, betting multiple streets, playing the player, not just the cards. Aldemir didn't fold under pressure. He kept his cool, adjusted his strategy, and stayed in the fight. For the first 20 minutes, the two traded jabs. Nothing too crazy, just small pots back and forth. But then Holmes started to chip away, and slowly the lead flipped. Holmes pulled ahead and the room exploded. This wasn't just a deep run by a recreational player anymore. He was now in position to win the whole thing, to take down the World Series of Poker main event as a guy who only played home games with friends. It was happening. The whole poker world was watching. But in poker, momentum is slippery. Holmes had taken control, but George Aldemir wasn't going anywhere. He stayed locked in, picked his moments, and slowly started chipping away. The back and forth began. No wild swings, just two players trading blows, neither backing down. It turned into a true test of nerves. What stood out was Holmes himself. You'd expect nerves, maybe some hesitation, but he looked completely at ease. No signs of pressure, no rushed decisions. Every move was deliberate. Even with millions on the line, it looked like a guy playing cards with friends on a quiet Thursday night, just with a few more cameras. Aldemir, though, was just as composed. This wasn't new territory for him. He didn't force hands or get fancy. He stuck to the kind of solid, disciplined poker that wins titles, the kind that waits for the right moment. And eventually, that moment came. They'd been battling heads up for over 2 hours when the decisive hand finally showed up. Holmes was on the button and opened to $6 million with King of Clubs, Queen of Spades. Aldemir made the call from the big blind with 10 of Clubs, 7 of Diamonds. The flop hit, 10 of Hearts, 7 of Spades, 2 of Hearts. Aldemir had flopped top 2 pair. Holmes had nothing but King High. Still, he stayed aggressive, firing $6 million into the pot after Aldemir checked. But Aldemir didn't just call. He check-raised, bumping it up to $19 million. That alone could have ended it, but Holmes didn't back down. He thought it over, took his time, and called. Maybe he picked up something in Aldemir's rhythm. Maybe he just trusted his read. Either way, he stayed in the hand. And then the turn came. King of Diamonds. Suddenly, Holmes had top pair, a hand that wins a lot of pots. Just not this one. Aldemir's 2 pair still had him beat. This time, Aldemir took the lead. He bet $36.5 million, a serious chunk of chips. Holmes leaned back and went into the tank. You could see it in his eyes, running through the possibilities, weighing every line. Finally, he made the call. Just like that, the pot crossed 130 million chips, one of the biggest of the tournament. Now, it was down to 1 card. The river brought the 9 of Clubs. No flush, no straight. On the surface, a blank. Aldemir checked. It was a risky move, maybe trying to trap, maybe just hoping to reach showdown. But Holmes saw an opening. He had 133 million behind. This was his shot to end it. He shoved all in. Everything on the line. Aldemir didn't snap call. He sat still, thinking. 2 pairs strong. He was wrong. The momentum and the chip lead would flip. He took over 2 minutes. Then, he called. Holmes tabled King-Queen, top pair, top kicker. A huge hand in most spots, but not against Aldemir's 10-7. Top 2 pair held. It was over. The room erupted. Just like that, Kare Aldemir became the 2021 World Series of Poker main event champion. $8 million richer, a gold bracelet on his wrist, and a performance for the ages. Holmes stood up, smiled, and shook his hand. No drama, no complaints, just a quiet glance at the board and a nod to the crowd. Because he knew what he'd done. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't a full-time pro. He didn't have a long list of tournament wins. Yet he pushed one of the best players in the world to the edge and nearly walked away with the title. After the match, Holmes talked about that final hand. He said when Aldemir paused on the river, he started to wonder if 2 pair was possible. In the moment, he believed his hand was good enough. He'd made his read, trusted it, and he didn't second-guess himself. I played the way I wanted to play, he said later. I'm happy with the decisions I made. The only thing he wished, that he could have sealed the win for the people who supported him all week. The friends back home in Atlanta, his wife, his kids, his home game crew. But life didn't change much after that. The very next morning, Holmes was on a flight back to Georgia. No big party, no headlines, no poker tour plans. Just back to work, back to normal, except now with $4.3 million in the bank and a story that every poker fan will remember. Because for one unforgettable week in November, the average guy outplayed the pros and nearly won it all. Even after everything he pulled off, Holmes didn't walk into a wave of sponsorships or flashy invites to high-stakes TV games. A few offers came in, but he turned them down. He wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was happy to head back to Atlanta, play in the same home game he'd been part of for years, return to the main event when the time felt right. Because for Holmes, Vegas wasn't just about the payout. Of course, $4.3 million changes your life, especially when you only play 1 tournament a year. But what happened during those 10 days wasn't just about money. It was about showing up as a complete unknown and going toe-to-toe with some of the best players in the world and nearly winning it all. And what made it even crazier? The run almost didn't happen at all. Late on day 7, Holmes had just 475,000 chips in front of him, not even a full big blind. He'd just lost a hand to Jack Oliver, King-Queen versus Ace-King, and it looked like the dream was over. But somehow, it wasn't. He caught a double up in a wild multi-way pot, then another, then a few more. The hands came, the reads were right, and the timing lined up. In just 90 minutes, he was sitting behind 16 million in chips. By dinner, it was 20 million. Before the night was done, he busted Chance Cornuth with pocket aces and ended up near the top of the leaderboard. That turnaround from almost out to final table force was the heartbeat of his whole story. It reminded everyone watching that in poker, it's never over until the last chip's gone. And if you stay calm, stay sharp, and catch a break or two, anything can happen. That calm, by the way, it didn't come from studying solvers or playing in private games with billionaires. It came from a basement in Georgia. Holmes plays regularly in a 2-5 no-limit game in Atlanta, the kind of game that's more about rhythm and reads than GTO charts. But don't let the stakes fool you. That game runs deep. According to Holmes, it plays a lot bigger than the name suggests. It's where he sharpened his instincts, built his style, and learned how to stay patient when things got rough. What's maybe most surprising is how fast he stepped right back into real life. A week after the final hand, Holmes was back in the office working his day job in payment processing. No big victory tour, no diving into the tournament scene, just back to business like it was any other Tuesday. For now, the main event is enough. He might try a few WSOP circuit stops in the future, but he's not planning on becoming a full-time pro. Poker is something he enjoys, not something he needs to survive, and he likes it that way. Still, what he did in 2021 didn't go unnoticed. Holmes earned a level of respect most players chase for years, not just for the deep run, but for how he carried himself through all of it. Calm, confident, in control. Commentators pointed it out. Opponents felt it. Even people behind the scenes noticed. One of the WSOP crew members stopped him after the final hand and said, "We've been watching you all week. We love how you play." For a guy who came in as a complete unknown, that kind of reaction says it all. He didn't just make a run, he made a mark. So, did George Holmes just deliver the greatest underdog run in main event history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening. This one wasn't just a deep run, it was a statement. And if you think the story ends here, think again. You don't walk away in the middle of a heater. This story's just picking up steam. If you thought this chapter was wild, wait till you see what's coming Wednesday and Friday. The drama's real, the legends are building, your seat's already reserved.